What if the serial killer the world caught was only half the story? Meet Kyler Hose. He's 61. He's on death row, and he's about to die in less than a week. But he just gave a journalist a name, Zima Patterson. Zima doesn't have a criminal record. He has a family, a job in security, and a completely unblemished reputation. But according to Hose, Zima wasn't just a friend. He was a partner in crimes that were never solved. This isn't just a story about a man facing justice. It's a hunt for the one who got away, hidden in plain sight for 30 years. October 14, 2028. The corrections officer told Jennifer Baleen 3 things before she entered Chillicothe. Don't touch him. Don't give him anything. Don't let him see you sweat. She had been covering criminal justice for 11 years. She had interviewed 2 men on death row before. One wept through the entire hour. The other spent 40 minutes describing the sandwich he planned to order as his last meal. She had sat across from grieving mothers and grieving widows, and once, a grieving dog warden who had accidentally euthanized the wrong animal and could not stop apologizing. She was not a woman who sweated easily. She wrote her name in the visitor log in her careful, left-leaning cursive. She surrendered her phone, her recorder, she'd been warned, her notebook with the wire binding. She was given a yellow legal pad and a Bic pen with no cap. "No cap," she said to the officer. A broad woman with tired eyes, named Jeffers. "Policy," Jeffers said, not unkindly. "In case he tries to." She made a vague gesture at her own throat. Jennifer understood. She took the pen. The interview room was smaller than she expected. Rooms in films are always larger than their real counterparts. More air, more drama, more distance between predator and prey. This room was the size of a generous closet. A table, 2 chairs, a window set high in the wall that let in a rectangle of October sky, pale and featureless. The smell was institutional. Bleach over something older, something that bleach had never quite reached. He was already seated when they brought her in. Kyler Hose, 61 years old. He wore a state-issued orange shirt tucked into orange trousers, with a precision that suggested either obsessive habit or genuine pride. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, as though he were waiting to begin a board meeting. His face had the quality of old wood, dark, weathered, still somehow dense with interior life. His eyes, when they found hers, were the color of still water over a dark bottom. "Ms. Baleen," he said, not a question, not quite a greeting, a confirmation, as though he had already seen her photograph and was now reconciling the image with the fact. "Mr. Hose," she sat, placed the legal pad on the table, clicked the pen. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I don't get many visitors." He said it without any self-pity whatsoever. It was simply a statement of inventory. "Your execution is scheduled for November 15th. I'm aware. I'd like to publish a long-form piece before they kill me." He smiled just slightly. "You can say it. I've had 28 years to make peace with the word." He unfolded his hands and refolded them. "Or not." That or not hung in the air between them. Jennifer wrote the date at the top of the legal pad. She wrote, calm, self-possessed, theatrical, genuine. "I want to start at the beginning," she said. "June 2000. You want to start with Officer Miles." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet, the opposite. He inhabited silence the way some men inhabit large houses, proprietarily, as though the space belonged to him by right. Annie Miles, he said finally, 32 years old. She had a daughter, I believe. 7, 8 years old at the time. He paused. I've thought about that girl a great many times. She'd be in her late 30s now. Maybe has children of her own. Jennifer wrote, volunteers victim details. Rehearsed empathy or real. Do you feel remorse for killing her? I feel, he stopped, considered. I feel the weight of it. Whether that constitutes remorse in the theological sense, I'm honestly uncertain. I'm not sure I'm capable of the kind of remorse that would satisfy you, or satisfy the court, or satisfy Annie Miles's daughter. I think I understand what I did. Whether understanding and remorse are the same thing is a question I leave to the philosophers. Do you understand what you did to the women? The shift was deliberate. She had planned to wait 3 sessions before the women, but something in his composure invited a harder angle. The way a polished surface invites a scratch just to see what's underneath. His expression didn't change. That was the thing. Most people, when you pivoted suddenly, showed you something. A flinch, a tightening, a microsecond of recalibration. Hose showed her nothing. The 4, he said. The 4 who were formally charged, yes. He looked at her for a long moment. You said formally, he said. I did. That's an interesting word choice, Ms. Baleen. It's a precise word choice. Another silence. He unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table, palms down. His fingers were long, the knuckles pronounced. She noticed he wore no ring, no jewelry of any kind, though she supposed that was the institution's doing, not his. I think, he said carefully, that this is going to be a more interesting conversation than I anticipated. She wrote. He anticipated the conversation, thought about it in advance, or wants me to think so. Tell me about the night you were pulled over by Officer Miles. He did. He told it flatly, without ornament. The way a man recites a story he has told many times before, not because it bores him, but because repetition has worn the emotion out of it like water wearing stone. He'd been driving. He'd been scared. He'd made a decision that he characterized not as rational, but as reactive. She found that interesting. She wrote the word down. Reactive, she said. As opposed to? As opposed to planned. He looked at the rectangle of sky through the high window. There are things I have done in my life that were planned. Officer Miles was not one of them. The implication settled into the room like smoke. She did not ask him to clarify. She wrote, things I have done in my life that were planned. She thanked him for his time. She said she would return the following week. He nodded as the officers came to retrieve him. At the door, without turning around, he said, you should pull the Cuyahoga County Court records from 1994, the November filings. Then he was gone. October 16th to 20th, 2028. She told herself she wouldn't. She made it 2 days. On the 3rd day, she drove to her office at the Cleveland Standard before 7 in the morning. The building was empty. The coffee was still brewing. The only sound was the radiator ticking against the autumn chill. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up every publicly accessible court record she could find for Cuyahoga County, November 1994. What she found, a dismissed assault case. The defendant's name had been redacted in the digitized version of the filing. The victim, listed only as Jane Doe 11 to 94, had reported being accosted near the intersection of West 25th and Lorraine. A man, according to her statement, had displayed what appeared to be a police badge. The case had been dismissed after the victim recanted. Jennifer sat with that for a long time. Victim recantation was not unusual. In cases of sexual violence, it was statistically common. Driven by fear, by shame, by the very real threat that some assailants made explicit, and that others communicated simply through their continued existence in the world. Hose had been documented telling at least one victim, "If you report me, you know what happens." She printed the record. She put it in a folder. She labeled the folder with a date and nothing else. She spent the next 3 days building what she began to call, privately, the map. It was not a literal map, though at one point she did tape a large sheet of paper to her apartment wall. She drew lines on it with a red marker until the whole thing looked like a diagram of her own anxious mind. It was more a document of confirmed facts, probable connections, and a category she had never used before in 11 years of reporting. Unknowns that Hose wants me to find. That last category made her uneasy in a way she couldn't entirely articulate. The formally documented crimes were themselves staggering in their accumulation. The 2007 DNA testing had linked him to a series of abductions across the 1990s. The 2013 testing extended that linkage. For women charged, one additional victim, a woman abducted at knife point on her way home from an AA meeting. She had been grieving her dead son. Hose had dragged her to an abandoned house and threatened her life with the serene confidence of a man who had done this before. That case produced the 2017 sentence of 50 years, concurrent with the 48-year sentence later reduced to 22. He had impersonated a police officer to abduct one victim. He had been, simultaneously, a man who shot a police officer to avoid arrest. She wrote in her notes, "He both hated and used the authority of the badge." What does that mean? Who does that? It meant she thought that he understood power as entirely instrumental. The badge was a tool. Rules were tools. Other people were tools. The only consistent principle was that Kyler Hose moved through the world extracting what he needed from it. She looked at the 1994 filing again. November 1994. Hose would have been somewhere in the middle of the decade that produced his documented victims. He had offered her this date the way you offered someone a key, with the full knowledge that they would use it. Why? She wrote, "He wants to be known. Not caught, he's already caught. He wants the full shape of himself to exist in someone else's mind before he dies. Then, underneath, or he wants me to look in that direction specifically." She circled the second note 3 times. October 21st, 2028. She brought the printed filing. She wasn't supposed to bring documents in. They had to be reviewed, approved, logged. Instead, she memorized 3 details from it and left the paper in her car. He was already seated when she entered. Same posture, same folded hands, same quality of patient occupation. He looked at her the way a chess player looks at a board that has developed interestingly overnight. "You went to the records," he said. "I go to a lot of records. It's my job." November 1994. She clicked her pen. "Tell me about 1994. That's a broad question. I have a broad interest." He almost smiled. "I was living on the east side then, off Kinsman. You know the area?" "I know of it. Different now." "Different then, too, in ways that are hard to explain to someone who wasn't there." He looked at his hands. "I was dealing, robbing dealers. That's what I did. I moved through that world like..." He paused. like something invisible. People didn't look at me and see danger. That surprised me always. People's capacity not to see. What were they not seeing? He looked at her. All of it, he said simply. She wrote, all of it. The filing I found, she said carefully, not specifying what filing, watching his face. It mentions a woman near West 25th and Lorraine. November 94. Does it? Someone who recanted. People recant, he said. Fear is a powerful motivator. Did you threaten her? The almost smile again. Ms. Baleen, I have been convicted of crimes for which I received sentences totaling well over 100 years, in addition to a death sentence that has survived multiple appeals. I have nothing material to gain by confessing to additional crimes, and there are statutes of limitations that have long since expired in any case. He tilted his head. But you're not asking for a conviction, are you? No. You're asking for the truth. Yes, the truth, he said, is more complicated than a filing. He leaned back slightly in his chair. There are things in those records from '94 that you haven't found yet. Not because they're hidden. Because you're looking for crimes. You should be looking for patterns. She felt the fine hairs on her forearms rise. What patterns? A pattern of proximity, he said. A pattern of assistance. The word dropped into the room. She wrote it down and underlined it 3 times. Assistance, she said. Meaning what exactly? He unfolded his hands and folded them again. There was a man, he said. A man I knew in those years. I'll call him R. R understood what I was. Not all of what I was. I don't think anyone understood all of what I was, but enough. Enough to find it useful. He paused. And I found him useful. In what way? In the way that 2 people with complementary. He stopped. He chose the next word with visible care. Complementary tendencies sometimes find each other useful. The room felt smaller than it had before. The rectangle of sky in the high window had gone from pale blue to the flat gray of coming rain. Are you telling me someone else was involved in the crimes you were charged with? I'm telling you, he said, that I was not the only person in 1994 who found West 25th and Lorraine to be a convenient location. He smiled now fully. It was a terrible thing to see. Not because it was monstrous, but because it wasn't. It was almost warm. You're very good at this, Miss Baleen. Better than the last journalist who sat in that chair. There was another journalist? 2019. A man from Columbus. He was interested in the death penalty as a policy question. He was not interested in me. He paused. There's a difference. She noted that he had shifted the conversation and that she had followed. She returned, R. Does her have a last name? R has a last name, a social security number, a current address, and, as far as I know, a completely unblemished record. He let that settle, which is, in its own way, the most frightening thing I've told you today. She drove home in the rain with both hands on the wheel, the radio off, her mind running very fast and very cold. October 22nd to 29th, 2028. She gave him the initial R. She searched for men with first names beginning in R who had been documented in proximity to Hose in the early 1990s. Court records, police blotters, the names of associates mentioned in the trial transcripts of Hose's robbery convictions. There were 7. 1 was deceased. 3 had criminal records of their own. Drug offenses, 1 DUI, 1 domestic violence charge that had been pled down. One had moved to Georgia sometime in the early 2000s. One she could not locate at all. One, a man named Zima Patterson, had lived on the east side of Cleveland throughout the 1990s. According to public records, he now resided in a suburb of Akron. Zima Patterson had no criminal record. She spent 4 days trying to link Patterson to anything. She found nothing. He had worked throughout the late 80s and 90s as a security guard for a downtown Cleveland office building. He had married in 1997. He had 2 adult children. He attended, according to social media accounts she found under his wife's name, a Baptist church in Akron. She found a photograph from a neighborhood association newsletter, dated 2022. A block party. Zima Patterson stood at the edge of a crowd of people, holding a paper plate, wearing a polo shirt. He was a compact man, somewhere in his late 50s in the photo with a wide, unremarkable face. He did not look like what Hose was implying he was, but she knew from 11 years of reporting that they never did. She cross-referenced Patterson's address history from the 90s with the locations of Hose's documented crimes. Patterson had lived, from 1991 to 1999, on East 93rd Street. Hose's documented victims had been abducted from various locations across the city. No single cluster. No obvious anchor point, except she found it at 2 in the morning on the 27th. Her eyes burning, the apartment dark except for her laptop screen. One of the documented victims, the 2007 case, identified in court documents as Victim B, had reported that after her abduction she had been held briefly at a location she described as a basement room. Concrete walls smelling of motor oil. A window at ground level she could see shoes through. She had identified the neighborhood under questioning as East Cleveland, possibly near East 93rd. Possibly near East 93rd. Hose's documented crimes. Hose's sentences. Hose's hands folded on the table. There was a man. Our complementary tendencies. She closed her laptop. She sat in the dark for a while. She thought about Zima Patterson at his block party with his paper plate and his polo shirt. She thought about the woman walking home from her AA meeting, grieving her dead son. She thought about Annie Miles's daughter, who would be in her late 30s now, who might have children. She thought about the word Hose had used, assistance. She reopened her laptop. She started a new document. At the top she wrote, "What I cannot prove. What I cannot print. What I am going to find anyway." October 31st, 2028. Halloween. The correction officers had a small bowl of candy at the desk. Jeffers was wearing a small plastic pumpkin pin on her uniform collar. The incongruity of it. The orange pin, the orange jumpsuits, the orange light of an autumn afternoon slanting through the institutional windows, made Jennifer feel briefly and profoundly vertiginous. Hose noticed the date. Of course he did. Appropriate, he said, for the kind of conversations we've been having. I've been looking into she said. She had decided this session to lead with what she had rather than wait to be directed. Something shifted in his face, a faint recalibration. She had surprised him the first time she had managed that across 3 interviews. "Have you?" he said. "I haven't found what you're pointing me toward, but I've found adjacencies." He studied her. "East 93rd, he said. Her chest went cold. She had not mentioned East 93rd. She had not mentioned Patterson. She had given him nothing. "How did you know I was looking at East 93rd? "I didn't," he said. "Until now." The terrible, almost warm smile. "Ms. Baleen, I've been talking to you for 3 weeks. I have a reasonable sense of how your mind works." She wrote nothing for a moment. Her pen was still in her hand, but she couldn't make herself write. "You're guessing," she said. "You mentioned R and told me to look for patterns, and now you're watching me confirm or deny your guesses. Is that what I'm doing? Isn't it?" He was quiet. The afternoon light moved on the concrete floor between them. "There is a thing," he said, "that law enforcement calls a cooling-off period, the time between crimes. In cases like mine," he said it without effect, cases like mine, as though classifying a weather pattern, "the period between events can vary considerably. The first documented incident was, according to the court, 1992, the last weeks before Officer Miles." He paused. "But cooling-off periods are uneven. Sometimes they compress, sometimes they expand, and sometimes—" He stopped. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes they expand because the individual is not acting alone, because the frequency is distributed." She put her pen down. She looked at him directly. "Are you telling me Zima Patterson committed crimes that were attributed to you, or that you committed crimes together?" His face was entirely still. "I'm telling you," he said very quietly, "that there are 6 women who were never connected to my case. 6, not 4, not 5. 6 women whose cases were either dismissed, misfiled, or simply never elevated to the investigators building the DNA case against me." He looked at the window. 3 of them I can account for." The sentence structure of that was deliberate. She felt it. 3 of them I can account for, meaning 3 he had done alone, leaving 3 unaccounted for. "And the other 3? She whispered. "The other 3, he said, "occurred on nights when I was elsewhere. I can prove that. The documentation exists. The records show me, verified by witnesses, by surveillance, by parole check-ins, to have been in specific locations on those specific dates." "Then who?" "Not because it was cruel, but because it carried in it 28 years of something she could not name. Ms. Baleen. I was a black man in Ohio in 2000 who had just shot a police officer. I was facing death. My attorneys were public defenders with caseloads that would give you nightmares. And," he stopped, "and," he looked at his folded hands, "and are new things about me that I preferred remain unexamined." The light flickered again. Outside, distantly, she heard what might have been children on a street somewhere. "You protected him." "I maintained," he said carefully, "a certain equilibrium." She drove home and sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before she could make herself go inside. November 1st to 8th, 2028. She filed a public records request for Hose's parole check-in logs from 1993 through 1999. The request would take weeks. She didn't have weeks. So she called in a favor from a source inside the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. A man named Torres who had fed her documents before and asked for nothing except that she never name him. Torres sent her, via a method she would not describe in print, photographs of 17 pages of parole log entries. She went through them with her red marker and her sheet of paper on the wall. She cross-referenced against the dates of Hose's documented crimes and the dates of what she had now come to call in her private notes the shadow crimes, the 6 cases Hose had referenced, the ones never formally connected to him. 3 of the shadow crimes, Hose's parole logs showed him checked in across town at the approximate time of the offenses. Not airtight, check-in times were approximate, the crimes' times of occurrence estimated, but materially inconsistent with his direct involvement. She sat on the floor in front of her wall for a long time. She thought about Zima Patterson at a block party in Akron with a paper plate. She thought about the security guard job, the uniform, the authority of a uniform, the way a badge, real or false, could make a woman hesitate for just a moment longer than she should. She called a detective she knew, a woman named Priya Mehta who had worked sex crimes in the 90s and now consulted for the AG's office. She described the situation in general terms. A source making allegations. Parole log inconsistencies. 6 uncharged victims. Mehta was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Which 6? Jennifer read her the approximate dates. Mehta was quiet again. Then, in a voice that had changed register entirely, "3 of those I know. The other 3, those are cases that were closed internally in 1998. I raised questions about the closure at the time. I was told the cases were transferred." She paused. "They were never transferred anywhere I could find." "Who handled the transfer?" The sign-off on 2 of them was a detective named Connors. He retired in 2002. She paused again. "And a security consultant who was brought in on some cases in the late 90s. Outside contractor. I never met him personally." Her voice was very careful now. "His name was on some of the paperwork." "What name?" A pause so long that Jennifer thought the call had dropped. "Patterson," Mehta said. "Zima Patterson. November 9th, 2028. 6 days before the scheduled execution. She had the pages. She had Mehta's confirmation, given off the record, not for print, but confirmed. She had the parole logs. She had a photograph of Patterson's signature on 2 case closure documents from 1998. She had enough to write the article, not enough to prove everything. Enough to ask the questions in public, which was sometimes all a journalist could do. But she went back to Chillicothe first. He looked different. She noticed it immediately. Not physically different, not diminished, but somehow less performed. As though, with the date so close, the energy required for theater had been redirected inward. "You found him," Ho said. "I found his name on documents." "Yes." He nodded slowly. He was careful. That was always his. He seemed to search for the right word. Discipline. His discipline was extraordinary. Mine was... He made a small sound that was almost a laugh. Mine was, as the record reflects, less so. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not accusatorially. Genuinely. He looked at her. "I'm going to die in 6 days." "Yes. There are things that exist in the world only because I know them. When I'm gone..." He stopped, looked at the window. "I'm not a good man, Ms. Baleen. I don't have illusions about what I am. But I find that I..." He stopped again. "Find that you what?" "Find that I cannot tolerate the idea of those 3 women remaining in a category marked unknown. Even if I am the only person who knows that category is wrong." He paused. "Even if the person who put them there goes on to his block parties and his church and his completely unblemished record. Why not go to law enforcement? Why talk to me?" He looked at her as though she had said something touchingly naive. "Because law enforcement already has his name on their documents. And his signature. And they filed it away in 1998 and have not looked at it since." He leaned forward very slightly. "You will look at it." She thought of Mehta's voice changing register on the phone. "What happened to the 3 women he..." She couldn't finish the sentence entirely. "2 survived," he said. "1 didn't." The room was very quiet. "He killed her." "The evidence." Ho said carefully, would suggest an outcome inconsistent with survival. And you knew. He said nothing. And you said nothing. For 28 years. Still nothing. Because he knew things about you. Because, he said finally, I was on death row for shooting a police officer. My credibility in raising these allegations was, he almost smiled, limited. And now I have 6 days. And you have. He gestured at her legal pad, at the notes she'd accumulated over the weeks, at everything she'd found. What you have. She looked down at her notes. Weeks of interviews. Red marker on paper. Meta's confirmation. Patterson's signature. There's something you're not telling me, she said. He looked at her. There are many things I'm not telling me. Something specific. About the woman who didn't survive. A long silence. Her name, he said, was not in any case file, because no one reported her missing, because she had no. He stopped, started again. She had no one who would have noticed, which is why she was chosen. He said the last word as though it tasted of something he was trying not to gag on. He was very disciplined about selection. That was always his primary. You said he was disciplined about selection. Oh, stopped. But you were there, she said. At least once. You implied 3 were yours. That means you were there at the same location, in the same world at the same. Ms. Baleen. You helped him select her. The silence that followed was the longest she had ever sat inside. Hose looked at the table. Not at his hands, at the table itself, the surface of it. As though reading something printed there in ink she couldn't see. I told you, he said very quietly, that I was not a good man. She did not write anything. Her pen was in her hand and she did not move it. I want her name in print, he said. That's what I want. Her name acknowledged in a publication that people read. So that she, he stopped, seemed to be having difficulty with something. So that she is not only in a category marked unknown. I can't print a name I can't verify. I know. Give me something to verify. He looked up at her. His eyes, above the dark, weathered terrain of his face, were. She would not write this in any article, wet, not crying, wet, the way eyes go when a person is suppressing something at significant cost. Her first name was Denise, he said. She was 24 years old. She had lived in Cleveland since she was 17. She came from somewhere in rural Pennsylvania. I don't know where exactly. She worked at a laundromat on St. Clair. The laundromat is gone now. He paused. She laughed at something I said. I have thought about that. Frequently. She wrote, Denise, 24, St. Clair Avenue Laundromat, Pennsylvania, 1994 or 1995. What did you say? She asked. That she laughed at? He shook his head very slightly. That part is mine. November 10th to 14th, 2028. She wrote for 4 days without stopping. She slept in 3-hour increments. She ate whatever was nearest and tasted nothing. The article ran on November 13th, 2 days before the scheduled execution. It was 9,400 words. It named Zima Patterson. It cited the parole logs, the case closure documents, Meta's on-record account of the internal transfer paperwork. It described 3 uncharged cases with their estimated dates and locations. It described the document bearing Patterson's signature. It named Denise, first name only, pending further investigation, and described what could be verified. a laundromat on St. Clair Avenue, the age, the provenance from somewhere in Pennsylvania, the year. It did not resolve anything. By the time the article ran, the Akron police had been contacted by the AG's office. Patterson had been reached for comment. He had declined, through an attorney who materialized within hours of the article's publication, which told Jennifer everything and proved nothing. The governor's office issued a statement that they were reviewing new information related to the Hose case. This was, Jennifer knew, almost certainly theater. The execution had been delayed twice already. Governor DeWine was not going to delay it a third time based on a newspaper article and an old man's 11th hour claims. But it was something. She called Meta. "The Denise," Meta said. "I think I might have something. There's a missing persons report from 1994. A Jane Doe reported by a neighbor, not a family member. The address on the report is a building 2 blocks from a laundromat on street. Claire that closed in 1997. Jennifer sat with her phone and felt something that was not hope and was not despair. Something in between that she didn't have a name for. "That's not confirmation," she said. "No," Meta said. "But it's not nothing." She went back to Chillicothe on the 14th. One day before, the interview room was the same. The smell was the same. The rectangle of sky was the same. Hose was not the same. He was dressed in the same orange, but something had gone out of him. Not his composure exactly. More like the performance that underlay the composure had been allowed to lapse. He looked like what he was, an old man who had done terrible things and who was going to die tomorrow. She sat across from him and opened her legal pad. "The article ran," she said. "I know. Jeffers told me." He paused. "She's been surprisingly—" He seemed to choose the word carefully. "Kind. These last few days." She did not write that down. Felt too private. "Patterson has an attorney," she said. "I expected that. The governor's office is reviewing. That will not change the date." "I know." He looked at her. "Did you find her?" "Possibly." Meta found a report. "It needs work." He nodded slowly. "There is one more thing," he said. She clicked her pen. "Tell me." He was quiet for what might have been 2 minutes. In interview terms, in professional terms, 2 minutes of silence was an eternity. She did not fill it. She had learned, over the weeks, not to fill his silences. "There's a woman," he said, "who is alive, who I will not name. I will not give you her name, because she has built a life, and she is not Denise, and she does not deserve to be." He stopped, restarted. "She was taken in 1997, by our, without my involvement, without my knowledge. I did not know until later, until he told me in a way that I understood to be," he paused, "a demonstration of what he was capable of what my silence was purchasing." Jennifer felt her hand go still on the pen. "He told you about a crime he committed," she said carefully, "in order to ensure your silence." "Yes, and you've been carrying that since 1997. He said nothing. "This woman, she's alive." "Yes, and she doesn't know that the man who—" "No, and you want me to. I want you to understand," he said. "That is not finished. The discipline, the selection, the care. These are not things that simply stop because someone who knows about them goes to his death." He leaned forward slightly. "He is 64 years old. He attends church. He has grandchildren. And he is still, as far as I know, entirely capable of the application of his particular discipline. The room was very cold. She was sure the room had not gotten colder, but it was very cold. "Tell me something I can verify," she said. "About the 1997 case." He opened his mouth. The door opened. "Jeffers, I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Hose, it's time for... They need you for..." She looked at Jennifer with an apologetic expression that contained also a finality, a setting down of something. "I'm sorry, Ms. Baleen. We're going to need to. The pre-execution procedures begin this evening and..." Hose stood. He straightened his orange shirt with the automatic precision of a man who had been doing it for 28 years. He looked at Jennifer. She was still sitting. The legal pad was in front of her, the pen in her hand. She had not yet written down what he had started to say. "Mr. Hose," she said, "finish the sentence." He looked at her. The warm, terrible smile was completely absent. What was on his face instead was something she had no ready framework for. Something that might have been, in another man, in another life, something like sorrow. "The 1997 victim," he said, "told a friend about what happened. Only one friend. The friend moved away. To Pittsburgh, I believe. She would be in her late 40s now. Her name, Mr. Hose." Jeffers, apologetic, final. "Her name was..." He turned toward the door. Jeffers held it open. He walked through it with the same proprietary occupation of space that he had always walked with, that had never once abandoned him across all the weeks she had sat across from him. The door closed. Jennifer sat alone in the small room. The rectangle of sky through the high window had gone the color of slate. The fluorescent light hummed. On her legal pad, the last line she had written read, "Her name was..." She stared at it for a long time. Then she put the cap on the pen. There was no cap. She had forgotten there was no cap policy in case he tries to. She held the uncapped pen in her hand, and she sat very still in the small room. She thought about a woman in Pittsburgh in her late 40s who did not know what Jennifer Baleen now knew. She thought about Zima Patterson at a block party with a paper plate. She thought about a laundromat on St. Clair that had closed in 1997. She thought about a young woman named Denise who had laughed at something, and whose laughter had, against all logic, against all evidence of what the man across the table had been and done and was, stayed with him for 30 years. Outside, somewhere, it had begun to rain. November 15th, 2028. 10:17 a.m. Kyler Hose was pronounced dead at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution at 10:07 a.m. by lethal injection. He was 61 years old. He did not make a final statement. Jennifer Baleen published a follow-up article on November 22nd, documenting the AG's expanded investigation into Zima Patterson. Patterson was questioned in December 2028. No charges had been filed as of the article's publication date. The missing persons report linked to the laundromat on St. Clair Avenue remained under investigation. The subject had not been formally identified. A woman in Pittsburgh was, as far as Jennifer Baleen could determine, still unaware of the investigation. The name Hose had begun to say when the door opened was never completed. Jennifer had written down every possible variant she could derive from the partial sound she'd heard. A hard consonant, possibly a vowel, possibly not. She had been unable to narrow it to any useful field. She kept the legal pad on her desk. She looked at the last line sometimes. Her name was... She was, as of this writing, still looking.